Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album, finally, from Lori McKenna, called The Bird and the Rifle. So about a week or so back, Billboard hosted a roundtable of female country music artists and the current frustrations they have dealing with country radio's inability to get any of them on the air. Now this has been an ugly situation that I've discussed before at length during the height of bro country, but even now that boom is gone, little has really changed outside of isolated moments of success, where B and C-list male acts can snag airplay and festival stages while leaving a lot of their female counterparts who might even be more famous than them high and dry. Now this hit an apex in 2015 with Tomato Gate, when radio consultant Keith Hill compared women in country to tomatoes in the salad, and yet a year later, not a lot's really changed outside of isolated moments. Casey Musgraves and Cam have both stalled out in the radio despite having some great singles, and though Maren Morris's My Church was a hit, I don't really see that follow-up coming anytime soon. Then you got Kelsey Ballerini's lacking concern about any of it. Well, we'll see if that changes when Peter Pan starts to dry up, and that's speaking of somebody who actually likes that song. And yet, that roundtable discussion had an undercurrent of optimism that things were indeed going to get better. And I'd argue that they're right, but I wouldn't say that any of them were leading the charge. With the exception of fringe indie artists like Dory Freeman, who definitely deserve a lot more attention, 2016 has had a slew of strong albums from women, specifically older women like Brandi Clark and Jennifer Nettles, who are releasing some great solo projects in their 40s. And add to that mix comes Lori McKenna, a songwriter who's been working behind the scenes for decades, but recently received a lot of praise and a Grammy for her work behind Little Big Town's Girl Crush, and a lot of acclaim for Tim McGraw's Humble and Kind. And yet, indie country fans know that she's been releasing critically acclaimed albums since 2000, with a distinctive folk-touched vocal tone and the sort of sharply incisive songwriting that's not afraid to pull any punches. She actually did release an album called Unglamorous on Warner Brothers in 2007 at the height of a small boom for women in country, and for the record, that album has aged incredibly well and still does hold up, but the production really is too slick to match her writing. I don't have any problem believing that it just got lost in the crowd. So she went right back to the indie scene, where country and folk blended a little bit more easily, and 4 years later in 2011 dropped a borderline classic with Lorraine. Seriously, looking for the 3 albums to get a full picture of Lori McKenna, it's 2004's Bitter Town, 2007's Unglamorous, and 2011's Lorraine. Hell, you could argue that the reason that her following 2 albums, 2012's Massachusetts and 2014's Number Doors, they didn't quite have the same impact is because look what they had to follow. Although in both cases you could make the argument that the songwriting didn't quite cut as sharply as the best hits of either of those albums. And yet, with the success of Girl Crush and now Humble and Kind, Lori McKenna probably has more momentum now than she's had in probably a decade. So she connected with Dave Cobb and put out a new album called The Bird and the Rifle. And yeah, I know, I'm late to the party here, but I knew after going through her entire discography, I had to cover this album. So, does it live up to my sky-high expectations? Well, yeah. Absolutely. I'm not quite certain that Lori McKenna has delivered yet another classic. Ask me again when I finish listening to the album another 20 or so times. But with The Bird and the Rifle, she definitely delivers one of the strongest country albums I've heard thus far in 2016. No, scratch that. One of the strongest albums I've heard thus far this year. This is a record that really got under my skin very early and refused to let go, with the best sort of production in order to match the cutting lyrics that go all the deeper with time. I'm not quite certain if it's better than Bitter Town or Lorraine again, but definitely rises to the challenge. And familiar territory for any Lori McKenna fan, but still incredibly powerful all the same. So let's start off with the area that's received the most criticism thus far, the production and instrumentation. Over the past few years, Dave Cobb has given the records that he's touched a distinctive tone and sound, warm and aged, but with enough texture and grit to accentuate the humanity of every voice and the crisp tone of every instrument. But the common complaint is that it's, well, tasteful. Particularly here, this is not production that's going to add an edge if the performer isn't delivering it herself, with only a few exceptions mostly serve to place the artist bare in the spotlight and little else. You're not going to get instrumental moments like the inverted acid-touch nightmare if it ain't all flowers from Sturgill Simpson's Metamodern Sounds in Country Music, or the burnished progressive outro of Children of Children from Jason Isbell, which was jaw-dropping in its beauty last year. But I get the feeling that Dave Cobb knows these songs will hit with a lot of impact if he just gets out of the way of the writing, and it has such as melodic accents are more restrained than ever, calling to mind most of the sparse production off of Something More Than Free from Jason Isbell last year, and that's a big compliment. And yet, there are some subtle differences. It's not quite as ramshackled, the acoustic guitars are a tad softer, and there's a firmer cushion of bass to balance out the touches of the more delicate, arranged instrumentation in the background. And while there are a few tones I think might have could have used a shade more bite, a little bit more depth than the rattling electric tone on All These Things, the descending warble of Always Want You, this is nitpicking of the highest proportion. Because the word of the day here, subtlety. Dave Cobb has always had a fine touch for instrumental dynamics, but this might be one of his most restrained and yet gorgeously organic productions to date, always letting the guitars and piano carry the melody with just enough mellotron or arranged instrumentation and strings to add that burnished accent touch, with just the sparse percussion often adding just enough of a beat on the muffled cymbals or deeper drums to act as a real foundation. Granted, it's not even really needed there. I really need to highlight how great the bass lines are on this album. Never really obtrusive, but thick enough to cushion the sound, make it feel all the more intimate. And make no mistake, that intimacy is quintessential to making these songs work for me, both through Lori McKenna's delivery. Her drawl is just enough to command the mix without needing to raise her voice, only a touch ragged because of time, and then through some of these great hooks. This album could have easily soared on much bigger tones. Indeed, some critics have commented this album might be a little bit too subtle and even keel, which I can see even if I disagree that it's a drawback, but this album doesn't need that, as I said, as McKenna's often telling very lonely, quiet stories, where age has tempered the raw emotion into something quieter, yet no less deeply felt. It's one of the reasons why I'm not bothered that the foundational melodies are actually pretty straightforward and catchy in their own right. Not just because Dave Cobb can flesh them out, because it fits the content, the more simplicity of the presentation, all the better. And let me stress this, Lori McKenna brought her A game here in terms of well-framed lyrics and themes, plenty which focus on the passage of time and how it just changes people. The relationships and lives of these people have the long-held scars of many unspoken experiences, where there's faint nostalgia, but also feel that there are some things that might have been broken from the start. The opening track, Wreck You, is a gut punch, as she doesn't always know what's changed in this relationship, but she can see it fading away. And to follow with the lost dreams and awkward love with the title track is a hell of a way to open the album. The real powerful gut punches there, and I've always loved her framing. There's no obvious villain or broad caricature in the writing, just humans facing the onset of entropy and decay as time carries on. Even the ghosts of the small town where she grew up are leaving on giving up on your hometown, where even attempted gentrification has sputtered out, and she tries to spend more time recapturing whatever light is left behind in her old home than the losses of the past, like her father's grave. It plays out in a similar way on We Were Cold, a wonderfully detailed small town romance that takes a turn for the complicated and poignant when she gets pregnant and sees her dreams fade a little bit as her friends go off to school and she's left with her husband in the small town, reflecting on an image of cool that's now just blurring away with time. And it becomes all the more stark on Old Men, Young Women, a song where you could have easily painted the girls as gold diggers or the guys as predators, but instead you get a surprisingly nuanced picture of human naivete and a desperation to capture or recapture something slipping away, be it memories of youth long forgotten or a man who knows how to treat a woman right. And this takes us to Humble and Kind, which yes is on the album. And look, I like Tim McGraw's cover and how much it feels like one voice echoing out of a mainstream country scene where he's the exception, not the rule. But I gotta be honest, Lori McKenna just normalizes the framing in a way that I found wonderfully charming. I really like the straightforward moralism that doesn't really feel like it's preaching, but just really connects for me. But of course, for as much as we all aspire to goodness, this album doesn't shy away from human failings either. The album closer, If Whiskey Were a Woman, is a prime example. She just can't be the person that'll give this guy solace or comfort or return his love the way he needs it. So she gives up to walk away, even though she knows that he'll be using the idea of her to keep on searching. And then there's the utterly heartbreaking Halfway Home, telling the story of a woman driving home in the middle of the night from a one-night stand, trying not to question her own value, as she knows that she shouldn't have to do this if the guy was worth it, and that she just needs to hold on. All the more conscious how these guys aren't going to be the savior of her or any other women in the same spot. And there's a revelation that comes tied to wisdom and maturity that really tempers this album, holding to the core of one's own internal value, even despite time's passage, which is where I've got issues with two songs near the end of the album, All These Things and Always Want You. It's not like either of these songs are remotely bad. They fit thematically, especially as time passes and Always Want You, as she tries to move past another broken relationship, but they don't quite match the same age as the rest of the writing, feel a bit out of place, a little too simple, a little bit too straightforward to match the rest of the framing. But again, that's a minor nitpick on an absolutely stunning album. Again, I'm not sure why I would place this album in comparison with Lorraine or Bittertown. The ending of Lorraine is damn near impossible to touch in terms of gut punch moments in 2010's modern country, but Lori McKenna is staking her claim as one of the best women working in the genre, with easily one of the best albums of this year. Period. For me, 9 out of 10, the highest of my recommendations, especially if you're looking for a subtle and yet powerful listen, continuing the winning streaks of producer and artist alike. And if this partnership continues forward, you know what? I can't wait to hear more. Definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I don't know how many of you have heard this album, but I got the poll up here. So what did you guys think? Do you think it's one of her strongest albums, or does it fall short? For me, it's amazing. I don't know how well it's going to stack up compared to the rest of her discography, but when you have someone who makes classics, you always run into that problem. Until then, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.